Hi, everyone. Welcome to this webinar of ASLO and ECOP, episode 29 on insights into scientific writing for early career scientists, ECOPs, and students. Thank you for joining us today. And if you would already like to introduce yourself in the chat, feel free to pop a message and we'll wait a few more minutes and then we will start with our webinar. For those who are already here, I will share a poll to get to know you, the audience, a bit better. So normally everybody should see a pop-up screen with a few questions. Where are you joining us from? I'm already seeing some answers. Somebody from Europe. Then a second question, what is your background? How much experience do you have with publishing a paper? And what is your biggest challenge in having a paper published? These are some nice things to know. Something else I would like to remind everybody is that during this webinar, you can leave any questions that you have in the Q&A chat box. And at the end, we will have a big Q&A sessions with our panelists who will make some time to get into those questions and give you some answers and guidance. So for those who already joined, again, this webinar is on insights into scientific writing for early career scientists, ECOPs, and students. And today we have as panelists Dr. Jim Cloern, Dr. Bridget Deemer, and Dr. Anabel von Jackowski. And moderators of today will be Gabriel and Dr. Brittany Sheeler. So feel free to put any questions you have for our panelists and moderators in the Q&A chat box. And for those recently becoming familiar with ECOP, short for the Early Career Ocean Professionals Network, this was endorsed by the UN Ocean Decade as a networking program in 2021. And these webinars are part of the mission to strengthen the perspectives of new generations of ocean professionals through knowledge sharing and creating a collective voice between early career scientists and more experienced people in the field. Okay, I will stop sharing the poll questions now, and then we can have a look at the answer. So if you haven't answered the poll yet, maybe I'll leave one more minute, and then we can have a look at who everybody in this webinar is. Okay, so having a look at the answers, we have people from West Africa, somebody from East Africa, from North America, South America, Europe, Oceania, and Asia. Then let's have a look at what your background is. I'm seeing phytoplankton, sciences, tourism, students, people working on a thesis, doing a PhD, people working with mammals, with bioacoustics, working at a university, doing research, working in management, working with ecosystems. And then how much experience do you have with publishing a paper? I see a few responses. I have published a paper. Somebody saying I have not yet published a paper and currently not interested, and I have not yet submitted a paper, but I would like to. So some mixed answers. And the biggest challenge in having a paper published is good data, visualization, having it published, the research, literature, getting ideas, getting feedback, the writing part, the rhythm in making a paper, finding a good rhythm of reading and digesting already published literature, finding the research gap, being able to collaborate with others and good feedback. So I think it's good that you are voicing these issues, because at the end of this webinar, our panelists will make some time to guide you further and answer some questions. So I think with this, I can leave the floor to Gabriel, who will start with his presentation.
Thank you, Anna, for that introduction and for the survey that you made. So before diving into the main agenda of the day, I wanted to brief us on the BlueCaD project, so Blue Capacity Development Project, which is one of the capacity development projects under the ECOP program. So the ECOP program is one of the UN Ocean Decade endorsed program. It enhances capacity for ECOPs, and at the onset of the UN Ocean Decade, we ran a survey in which we wanted to understand the needs and priorities of ECOPs, as well as the different activities that they work on and how they contribute to the Ocean Decade outcomes. And we realized that ECOPs globally contribute a lot and are involved in different activities that would culminate into the success of the Ocean Decade outcomes. So also in this survey, we had assessment of the needs and priorities, and one of the items that was cited was inadequate training. And for that, we established the BlueCaD project to be able to bridge this gap. So the approach involves leveraging ECOP's potential in ocean conservation and observation, as well as data management by providing online and blended technical courses, the field training on data collection techniques for basic oceanographic parameters, science communication and writing courses, as well as enhancing constructive networking and innovative solution among ECOPs. So some of the trainings that we've been able to offer from 2023 includes a remote sensing course that we gave for ECOPs in Africa, our course that we gave for ECOPs in Asia, as well as ECOPs in Africa, Python programming that was given to ECOPs in Central America, and ecological survey techniques in data management. This was a blended course which was given to ECOPs from Europe, Western Asia, and North Africa. And the blended part took place in Malta. So we do this with the support and a collaboration of the different organizations and established institutions, as we can see the logos here. The training process, to be able to ensure that we give quality trainings to different ECOPs. So normally our target group include bachelor students, master students, and PhD students. And then the item, we normally work with ECOPs for ECOPs. So different ECOPs, for example, those in their postdocs or PhDs who are experts in some of these concepts, come up and volunteer to give the training to other ECOPs. So we develop the concepts, and then we share with the Ocean Teacher Global Academy. So they offer pedagogic support to ensure that what we are giving is of good quality standards, and then they give their feedback on the best. And then we mobilize resources. So that includes the teachers who will teach, as well as financial resources for in-person components. And then we do the course announcement and selection. So these are normally targeted depending on the specific course that we are looking for, or a certain region, to balance the time differences as well. And then we do course materials development and teaching, and finally reporting and feedback. So for the next plans, we just established, we also want to voice and amplify ECOPs voices. So we have got the podcast, Gen Z podcast, and then we are going to have a blended course in which we are partnering with University of Michigan, Technical University of Mombasa, Kemfree, and other organizations, including WIAMSA. This is going to take place in Kenya. And then we are organizing a cruise training for ECOPs on board Ashton in April 2026, and ecological survey techniques course, which will take place in Bruges, Belgium, ahead of the 7th Marine Biodiversity Conference next year. And with that, I thank you, and I would like to invite the next speaker, Dr. Brittany Schiller, who is the Communications Director and Programs for ASLO. And prior to this role, she served as NOAA Sea Grant NOW's Legislative Fellow, and she holds a PhD in Oceanography from Rutgers University and is passionate about science communication and aquatic research. Thank you, and Brittany.
Thank you so much, Gabriel. Hi, everybody. I'm going to share some slides briefly. Before we get into the tutorial portion of today's agenda, I just wanted to go over a few things to let you know a little bit about our organization and things that we have going on. So ASLO is the Association for the Sciences of Limnology and Oceanography. We're a professional scientific society that fosters a diverse international scientific community that creates, integrates, and communicates knowledge across the full spectrum of aquatic sciences. So we do this in a number of ways. We have a variety of conferences and networking opportunities, professional development opportunities, and a portfolio of high impact academic journals. So some opportunities that we have going on right now that might be of interest to the audience. First, we are currently accepting applications for the Raylan Cole Editorial Fellowship. This is a 2-year fellowship for early career researchers and ECOPs that gives you a deep dive into the world of scientific publishing. The fellows work closely with the editors of the ASLO journals on a variety of projects in the publishing sphere, everything from open access and peer review to editing and a variety of different topics. And that QR code there you can scan and it'll bring you to the application. Another thing that will be coming up soon is the science communication internship. And this is for advanced graduate students and recent graduates to work remotely in the communications office. And the intern works on all the different aspects of work that the organization is doing. So everything from education and engagement, press release writing, marketing, social media, policy, and a lot of different types of writing. The application's not open yet, but that will be coming up probably in a couple of weeks. We also do a number of different professional development programming at our meetings. And so in 2026, ASLO is co-sponsoring 2 meetings, the Ocean Sciences meeting in Glasgow, Scotland, in February, and a joint meeting with SIL in Montreal, Canada in May. So keep an eye out for those. We also have a variety of online resources. You can go to our website, aslo.org, go to resources, and you can scroll down to our workshops and professional development library and see a whole host of webinars and resources, everything from well-being in aquatic science to peer review and more topics in writing and science communication. Make sure you follow us on social media. We're available on all of these platforms, and you can scan this QR code to sign up for email updates if you don't get them yet. And I'm going to turn it now to our editor of Limnology and Oceanography Letters, Dr. Jim Cloern, and I'm just going to stop sharing my screen. And if you don't see or hear the video, please let me know in the chat.
Hello, welcome to this HASLO tutorial on scientific writing. This is about a 30-minute presentation, and we'll have plenty of time for questions after. Let me first introduce myself. My name is Jim Cloern. I am a coastal ecologist interested in how estuaries function as ecosystems. I published my first scientific article in 1976 and have published journal articles every year since. I also have experience as a journal editor, first as editor of the journal Estuaries and Coast for 5 years, and now nearly 6 years as editor of ASLO's journal Limnology and Oceanography Letters. And over the course of this nearly half century as an author and a decade as an editor, I've learned some lessons about scientific writing. And my purpose here is to share some of these lessons, targeting those of you who are beginning your careers as publishing scientists. So let's go. A question that I'm often asked as an editor is, what's the difference between a paper that's accepted and one that isn't? And in essence, I think the question is, what makes a well-written paper? And I think that you know the answer to this question from your experiences as a reader. I know you've read some papers that when you finished, you thought, wow, this was a great paper. It was so clearly written. The topic is timely and interesting. The experimental design was excellent, and so were the analyses. The conclusions are insightful and well supported by the data. This paper changed the way I think about this problem, and it's going to have an effect on my research. So as an author myself, this is the kind of paper that I strive for. And as an editor, this is the kind of paper that I'm looking for. If you ask readers and authors what makes a well-written paper, you'll probably get many different kinds of answers. And from my perspective, well-written papers have 4 attributes, and I'd like to talk about each of these individually. First, well-written papers tell a story. You know that some papers are a pleasure to read, and often this is because they are structured around a story. These papers are narratives, beginning with a question or puzzle, and then each section of the paper touches on that guiding question or puzzle. And this writing style is effective because our brain remembers and responds to a good story better than an isolated collection of facts. When I was early in my career, we had this general sense, and I think we were taught, that scientific writing should be formal and authors should be distant from readers. Somehow we thought that formal writing was credible writing. But we've learned that our science is more impactful if we engage readers by presenting our research as stories. Over the past few decades, publishers, journals, and authors have embraced a narrative writing style because it's a powerful way to communicate. For example, this top editorial announces a new journal that was launched specifically to publish scientific articles written as narratives. In the center here, this book, written by a communications expert, explains the need for narratives in science. And in this article published in PNAS, the article talks about narratives and storytelling to communicate science. It's pretty clear now that our thoughts about how to communicate through writing have really changed in the last half century. And I think as a result, our papers are clearer and more fun to read. When I give this presentation, people ask, okay, Jim, so how do I learn to write in a narrative style? I think a good starting place for you is to think about writing with the language you speak. Imagine having a conversation with the reader and taking them by the hand and walking them through your story. Another step is to make sure you use first-person active voice. I use this method because, instead of this method was used because. This writing style connects you as a person to a reader. Second, well-written papers are clear and concise. And clear writing means simple language, short sentences, active and first-person voice, minimum use of acronyms, jargon, and technical terms. There are many guides to writing, and this little book, The Elements of Style, now over 100 years old, is timeless and one of my favorites. And in this book, the definition of concise is compact, minimalist writing. This little guide has a list of rules for effective writing, and my favorite is to make every word count. Readers like compact papers, and following this rule can get you there. This essay, published in L&O Letters, was written by Scott Hotaling when he was an Aslo Rail and Coal editorial fellow. The essay provides rules for concise writing, and my favorite rule is get to the point. I think it would be very helpful for you to take your first draft of a paper and evaluate it with these two rules of making every word count and getting to the point. And you will discover that you have eliminated a lot of unnecessary words and sentences, and your paper will be more concise and enjoyable for readers. Third, well-written papers are logical, and we see two levels of logic. One level is the way your paper is structured, the sequence of information you present as you tell your story. I've handled papers where reviewers say that they have a hard time following the authors, and this means that they haven't structured their presentation of information in a way that is logical and easy to follow. A second level of logic is in study designs and data analyses that should be sound and logically targeted to address your central question or puzzle. I often see reviewer comments that the data and their analyses don't support the author's conclusions. This is a fatal flaw in papers that leads to rejection for publication. Lastly, well-written papers end with an answer to the so what question. I have handled papers where the authors present a new study that tells a story, it's logically written, but leaves readers with the question, so what? Readers and editors want to know how your study is useful, how it meaningfully advances your science, what's new, and how would your results be applied and used by others in their research. Okay, so what does it take to write a well-written paper? Telling a story requires imagination and creativity. Clear, concise writing comes from hard work and is the result of many revisions. A logical paper is structured in a way that tells a story and has conclusions that are strongly supported by your data and analyses. Answering the so what question requires a deep knowledge of your field so you can explain how your work advances your field of science. The bottom line here is that it takes major effort and thought to craft a well-written paper. Next, I'd like to share some specific lessons that I've learned about crafting well-written papers and, to the point, manuscripts that will have a good chance of being accepted for publication. The first thing you should do after you've decided where to submit is go to the journal webpage and read the author guidelines. In particular, it's important for you to read the scope of the journal to confirm that your paper meets the expectations of the editorial board. Here's an example of the expectations of submissions to L&O Letters. And you can see that we're looking for cutting-edge results that have broad interest, have potential to advance knowledge, are concise and highly focused in their analysis. It's important for you to ensure that the paper you are writing meets the expectations of the journal you're targeting. And if you're unsure, don't hesitate to contact the editor. We welcome inquiries about suitability of papers for our journals. Some journals also show the guidelines they send to reviewers. And these can be very helpful to you as an author because they tell you exactly how reviewers are expected to evaluate your paper and the criteria they're asked to use in their evaluations. This gives you a heads up because you can use these guidelines and criteria to self-evaluate your paper. Before you submit, go through your paper to verify that it explains the originality of your work, how it advances the field, that it addresses a topic of broad interest. It's clearly written and technically sound. Your graphics are clear and engaging. And ask if you've presented conclusions that are supported by data and your analyses. If the answers to all these questions are yes, then you're ready to submit your paper. Our lab had a tradition of giving a talk about our work to the group before writing begins. And I think this is a great way to check the story you want to tell, if its logic holds up and if you can tell it clearly. I know from my own experience that we can get blocked in our writing. And in many cases for me, I was blocked because I hadn't fully developed or even fully understood the story that I wanted to tell. I think another great pre-submission practice is to ask a colleague for a review of your manuscript. As USGS scientists, we're required to do this. And in my experience, each manuscript I submitted was stronger than my first draft because a colleague identified weaknesses, areas where the paper needed more clarity, and just gave a fresh perspective that was always useful. Unless you are an exceptionally gifted writer, and I am not, it takes a lot of work and many drafts before your paper is ready for submission. For those of you who are beginning your publishing careers, my advice is to be prepared for the process to take more time and work than you thought. I probably go through at least 15 revisions before I think a paper is ready to submit, and each version is more compact and clearer than the last revision. Sometimes people ask me how I write a paper, and we all have our own styles, and you will find yours. I've learned over time that the best process for me is to start with the figures. Figures present your results and they are visual. So I start by laying out the figures, find a logical sequence, and then from there build a story. I often don't know the story I want to tell until after a study is completed and we've seen all of the results. So here's some advice. If you find yourself getting stuck, try putting your figures in a logical sequence, think about the message of each figure, and then ask if you can build a story from those messages. Now I want to talk about graphics, and we have an array of wonderful tools for producing graphics, and now are including even videos and animations to make our papers come alive. Engaging and clear graphics are another element of well-written papers. There are many online and published guides for producing effective graphics. And as an example, we published this essay that describes how humans process visual information and what that means for producing effective graphics. The authors of this essay wrote that nearly all figures can be improved with a basic understanding of the characteristics of an effective figure, along with the tools needed to create effective figures. They gave this example of steps we can take to increase the information content of a simple bar graph. Box plots convey more information than bar plots about differences between populations. Showing individual data points conveys more information. Adding color and jittering individual data points is even more informative. And use the largest font sizes that fit on your axis labels to help readers quickly see what's being plotted and the units. As an editor, I'm disappointed when I see figures like the top two here, and I see a surprising number of them. I'm disappointed because the authors have lost an opportunity to produce a more informative figure like the one in the bottom right. I'm going to leave this slide up here for a minute so you can write down the title. Much of our science is about differences between experimental treatments or between populations or geographic regions or process rates. And we use p-values to make judgments about the significance level of those differences. I strongly suggest that you read this article that has been downloaded over 700,000 times. It's a statement from the American Statistical Association to clarify what p-values tell us and what they don't. And this article makes two key points. The first is that p-values do not measure effect sizes. They don't tell us the magnitude of the effect of X on Y. And secondly, any effect, no matter how tiny, can produce a small p-value if the sample size is high enough. Here's an extreme example to illustrate the point. If you do a linear regression of y on x here, you could conclude based on the p-value of the regression that x and y are significantly correlated. But the small p-value is simply a consequence of the large sample size. The effect size, in this case, the slope of the regression, is trivial. So as an editor and reader, I don't care about p-values by themselves. I care about the effect size of one variable on another. So I ask authors that if they report p-values, also report size effects too. This is perhaps the most common guidance I give to authors about data analyses. One of the most important decisions you make as an author is where you submit your paper. You have many options, and I will admit to you that I have a strong bias for journals that are partnerships between a publisher and a scientific society, like ASLO, AGU, ESA. And one reason for my bias is that the publishers of these journals share their profits with the scientific society. For ASLO, more than half the author publication payments are given back to the society. And scientific societies use their share of profits to support programs for the scientific community. For example, ASLO is committed to programs like these that mentor, connect, diversify, and financially support early career researchers. These programs are made possible by profit sharing from the publisher, Wiley. This is one reason for my bias toward journals published by scientific societies. Okay, now let's shift gears and talk a bit about how you can write a paper that will attract readers. Your paper can't have an impact unless it's read. And the competition for readers is intense and growing. In 2020, there were over 45,000 academic journals that published over 4.5 million articles, and both are increasing. Potential readers need to find your paper and then be motivated to read it. And there are steps you can take to ensure that both happen. One step is to compose an engaging title. Titles are important because readers use them to decide if they want to open up your paper. You can find lots of good advice online for crafting effective titles. Here's an example, and it recommends that you avoid technical language. It turns off non-specialists. Don't promise something in your title that isn't supported by data in your paper. I actually see this fairly frequently. And that sparking curiosity in your title will draw readers into your paper. I added two myself. First of all, good titles are short. Some recommend no more than 15 words. And second, good titles require creativity. So put time and thought into yours. Here are 3 examples of titles that caught my attention when I first saw them. I mean, how could you not open up a paper that talks about the age of the Amazon's breath? The key point here is that titles are important for attracting readers, and good titles require effort and creativity. If potential readers are attracted by your title, and I hope they are, they will next read your abstract. And this is the next step in the process of deciding if readers want to open up your paper and read it. There are many good online guides for composing abstracts, and I like this 5-step recipe written by a journal editor. So this editor suggests that you begin with a 2-sentence introduction, follow that with a 1 sentence about the problem you addressed, another sentence that begins with "here we show that," then 3 to 5 sentences to present your important findings, and finish with 1 to 2 sentences about the implications of your results. This is what I call the so what question. Now, you don't need to follow this template strictly, but this is a good general example, a good general template to follow. And remember that journals have word limits for abstracts, so you have to keep that in mind as you're constructing your abstract, and also to include keywords that are different from the keywords in your title. You all know that abstracts are mini versions of your paper, and many journals now also require lay summaries of your work. These are the equivalent of an elevator speech to explain to non-scientists what you did and why it's important. Here are 2 resources to help you craft an effective lay summary. We call these scientific significance statements. First is a guide for writing lay summaries that was published as an editorial in L&O Letters. I recommend that you check this out. And below that is a template included in our author guidelines. You see that this template has 3 components to describe the general topic of your paper, identify a challenge or knowledge gap, and then finish with an explanation of how your work resolved that challenge or knowledge gap. When I began my career, there was no internet and we knew nothing about promoting our work. It never occurred to us. But now there are many online platforms you can use to promote your work. Here are just 3 examples. ResearchGate lets your followers know when you have published something new. We all need to have an ORCID identifier, and this platform also updates your record when new papers are published. And you can announce the publication of new papers yourself through social media. So my advice is don't hesitate to promote your papers. You've worked hard to publish a study. You want the community to read your paper, and you can help them find it. Don't be shy. We are now in an era of big data, big science, and papers are now written by many authors. So we need to learn how to write as a team. And I like this guide that was published in AGU's EOS newsletter. It presents results of a workshop to develop good practices for collaborative writing. And this team went on a writing retreat so they could focus their time together on writing with no distractions. They used free writing as a brainstorming exercise. And this is when everyone writes down ideas that just come off the top of their head. And each of these ideas is discussed as the team begins to craft a paper, its content, and structure. These authors suggest that you hold off on writing your introduction. There was a period in my career when I wrote papers linearly, beginning with the introduction, then moving on to methods and results. And it didn't take me long to realize that this linear approach doesn't work because papers evolve, ideas evolve, the story evolves, and they sometimes change a lot as you go through the writing process. So I had cases where my original introduction ended up being unrelated to the final paper. We all have our own writing styles, and now I wait and write the introduction to papers as the last step in writing a manuscript. Now, writing with a team can be very rewarding, but there are challenges. And one of the bigger challenges is how to answer this question. Who should be an author on a paper, and who should lead and be the first author? This authorship question is a lively topic in the community of scientific publishing, and that community hasn't endorsed one single answer. For example, authorship is determined by different criteria in different fields of science. However, there is a general consensus that authorship requires members of a team to meet specific criteria. And as an example, here are 4 criteria from Springer Publishes, and these reflect authorship criteria in the earth sciences. So the criteria include that a potential author has made substantial contributions to the conception or design of the work, or the acquisition, analysis, or interpretation of data, that they have drafted the work or revised it, they approve the version to be published, and they are accountable for the accuracy and integrity of the work. And further, members of a team who have not met these 4 criteria should be listed in the acknowledgments of a paper. My strong advice is to discuss early in a study what your group collectively agrees to be the criteria for authorship, and decide early, even before writing begins, who will lead production of a manuscript and who will be first author. It's now 2025, and I can't talk about scientific publishing without saying something about generative AI. We now are in a brave new world, and we know that artificial intelligence is being used by authors and reviewers. This is now topic number one in the world of scientific publishing, and much is being written about the potential benefits and threats of AI to scientific publishing. We really don't know how this is going to play out, but for the moment, journals and publishers have established policies related to artificial intelligence. This slide is a quick summary of ASLO's policies for use of AI for submissions to its journals. And first, AI use is permitted, but only to correct grammatical errors and improve the clarity of your own original writing. Second, authors are required to disclose the use of AI and explain how it was used. Third, this disclosure goes in the acknowledgments part of your paper. And fourth, AI tools cannot be listed as authors. And during the submission process, you'll be asked to declare your use of AI tools and explain how they were used. We're looking here for full transparency. And lastly, it is strictly forbidden for reviewers to use AI in their evaluations of manuscripts. Now, I'd like to end with two pieces of advice from an editor. My first advice is don't do this. This is an article title, and the authors apparently thought they needed 41 words to explain what their paper is about and attract readers. I will admit to you that as an editor, I am already skeptical about what follows in this paper. I want to show you here a contrast. This is the title of a paper I just published, and you can see that it's possible to tell readers what your paper is about and its major conclusion with just 12 words. My second piece of advice is about the final sentences in abstracts and conclusions. These are key places where you answer the so what question. And I often see abstracts and conclusions that end with weak general statements that don't summarize for readers the primary conclusions of their study and why they are important. In this case, we need to know how specifically the author's work contributes to a broad understanding of limnology. You can do better than this. I have thrown a lot of information at you in a short period of time, and we know that you have questions about writing and publishing that I haven't addressed. I have invited these two very talented writers who have experience as editors and asked them to help me field your questions. So let's now turn this back to Brittany.
All right, thank you so much, Jim. We're going to move on now to the Q&A. I've been seeing a lot of questions come through during the presentation. So unfortunately, Dr. Scott Hotaling will not be able to join us today, but we do have Bridget Deemer, a research ecologist at the U.S. Geological Survey Southwest Biological Science Center. And we're also joined by Dr. Anabel von Jackowski, who is a postdoctoral researcher at Stockholm University. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take a look, and I know we had something come in. So the first question is actually about the review process of writing a peer review. Is the best practice to follow PRISMA guidelines when selecting papers, or does PRISMA depend on the context? So does maybe Jim, do you want to speak a little bit about peer review? And I know that's a little perhaps off topic, but you want to take that question?
I do, yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, I want to make sure you understand that I invited Anabel and Bridget to join the question and answer session because first of all, you're going to get tired of my answers. And secondly, I think you probably would like to hear answers to questions from other early career researchers. So we're going to share the stage here in terms of dealing with questions and answers. The question about, we could spend an hour talking about peer review. It's an important topic. It's a deep topic. I saw this question online about PRISMA, and I will be perfectly honest with you. I've never heard of PRISMA, so I looked it up. And PRISMA is apparently a format for writing reviews of review articles and metadata rather than research articles, and it's got 27 steps. So I guess what I would like to say a bit about is peer review for the journal that I edit, and I think it's true for all of ASLO's journals. So when we send an invitation to somebody to review a manuscript, we give them very clear instructions about what the structure of the review should be and the kinds of questions that we want to see answered from the peer reviewers. So we ask reviewers questions like, does this manuscript fit the journal? Does it fit the scope of the journal? Are the methods and analyses of data sound? Do those analyses and data support the underlying conclusions of the paper? Does this paper advance knowledge in some way that merits publication? What are the strengths of the paper? As an editor, I would like to know from peer reviewers what the strengths of the paper are, because they are experts in the field. They know the field better than I do. And then what are the weaknesses? And when reviewers identify weaknesses, I ask them to provide for the authors some guidance about how those weaknesses can be resolved. There are a lot of really helpful online guides for peer review. I know that AGU has a really good guide. I know that Nature has a good guide for peer review that you can find online. And ASLO and other societies we all see the need for teaching peer review. We need those of you who are beginning your careers to join the peer review pool, and we think it's important to provide guidance for you about how to do peer reviews. So Anabel, anything you'd like to add to this, say about peer review?
Yeah, Jim, I just want to thank you because I felt the same way when I saw that question. And I was like, what is this? I really think that peer review is something that you learn over the years. And it also, I want to say, makes your writing a lot better. So if you guys are PhD students, doctoral researchers, whatever synonym you guys use, I would actually encourage you guys to ask your supervisors if they currently have something they're reviewing, and if you can actually kind of give them a first draft, or you guys even like talk about the review. You both do the review. You talk to your supervisor. Oh, this is what I think might have been a strength of the paper or a weakness, or here's where maybe the methods aren't as clear to me. Can we talk about that? That's at least what my PhD supervisor did, and I think that was really important also in helping me write those papers towards that PhD title. Yeah, do you guys have any other suggestions? But thanks for that question.
Bridget, do you want to say anything about this?
I don't have too much more to add. I definitely agree with Anabel that it's a great opportunity if you can peer review a paper with a mentor. It's not something that we're taught how to do, but it helps us think about how to write better papers ourselves. And so we also have an early career review list for the ASLO journal. So I can drop a Google form in the chat if folks are interested in being a peer reviewer. They can leave there. You can leave your expertise and interest there.
Could you do that, Bridget? Because I know that there are people watching this who would like to be invited to review papers for our journals. And I know from our editorial board that the editorial board members use this list that Bridget has compiled. They tap into this. And in terms of the point that Anabel made, when we send an invitation letter to reviewers, we make it very clear that if they would like to use this as an opportunity to start the process of teaching your postdocs or advanced PhD students to co-review the manuscript. This is a really good way to learn. Not all supervisors do this or offer this, but if you have a supervisor who's willing to share with you and let you look over their shoulders and you contribute to the review, this is a powerful way to add you to the peer review pool.
Yeah, so
and-
I just want to,
Go ahead.
quickly add, maybe it's not clear to everybody. You tend to then get invitations for peer review once you've completed your PhD. Those kind of roll in when you stay in academia or, yeah. So it's usually something that happens at a later stage.
And I like your point that it makes your writing better. We don't think about this, and it's true.
Right. Thank you for those really important insights. And I apologize. I was seeing in the chat that the question was actually about writing a review, not a peer review. So maybe we can move over to just a few questions about some tips on what makes writing a review paper different than writing a research article.
Okay, I'm sorry I answered the wrong question. We have L&O letters says different article types. Most of the submissions that we get are research letters, and this is a short format journal, so 3,000 words, and these are original research. We also publish essays, and we publish what are now called synthesis articles. And synthesis articles are, I guess, our equivalent of review articles. And these are not necessarily invited. Most of these are submitted by authors who have been working on a problem for a long time. So whether it's a review paper or a synthesis article, the purpose is for authors who are very knowledgeable of a particular topic, like changing seasonal patterns of phytoplankton, for example. In a review, the authors will tell us what the current state of the science is. What are the conceptual models of the problem now? How have they been developed? How have they been supported by data? What are the key papers I should be reading in this field? And then the second part, and especially for these synthesis articles that we publish, we're looking for not only looking backwards, but looking forwards. What are the really key challenges that we face in this field right now? What kinds of approaches can we use to advance this science as we move forward? And I think these are really valuable article types. In fact, they're so important that we've reached a point for L&O letters where we now have published 50 of these synthesis articles, and we're going to bind these together in one virtual issue. So this journal is all open access, and so I hope within the next month or so, all 50 of those synthesis articles will be bundled together in one place, open access. And they fall into 5 different kinds of themes. One of the themes is, for example, global change. So we've published about 10 synthesis articles that relate to some aspect of global change. So in terms of writing them, I think the traditional scenario has been senior level scientists who have been working on a problem for several decades take on the initiative to launch a review or synthesis article. Many of them are co-authored. These papers are more highly cited than regular research articles. And there's just a great reference. If you don't know something or much about a topic, or you want to learn more about a particular topic, these are just a great way to get introduced to that topic because they're written by experts, they're contemporary, they're up to date, they're authoritative. And in the matter of time that it takes you to read 6,000 words of text, you can learn a lot in that amount of time. And you have access to the best articles to read if you want to start doing your own research. I think they're a really good way for graduate students to get inspired for particular topics to work on. The second part of these synthesis articles that talks about what are the next challenges that we face. I think this is a great way for students to think about topics that they would like to address in their research. I don't know if that answers the question, but kind of off the top of my head, my thoughts on research reviews.
I'll chime in a little bit because I did a meta-analysis, which is, there's different types of reviews, but I did that as the last chapter of my PhD. And I'll just share the insight that a lot of process of writing a review paper is reading a lot of papers and remembering that you should be writing as you're reading. So, you know, writing some summary sentences after you've read a paper to identify key points, or maybe you're extracting data. There's some really nice extraction tools from the health literature. There's a program called Covenants where you can kind of organize a meta-analysis or other types of review where you're extracting the same information from every paper. But I think sometimes we tend to think about the writing process as something that comes at the end, when really integrating it with the reading that you're doing and thinking about how the papers you've read are going to get woven together is
So
really helpful.
Bridget, what is a meta-analysis?
So it's a systematic analysis across a bunch of papers where you're summarizing findings. So, you know, maybe if there's a general idea that we see a certain trend, actually querying papers having, you know, the same keywords, and then asking if, you know, the findings of those individual papers actually support a general notion of, you know, a pattern in the literature.
Anabel, what do you expect from review articles?
I actually think they're probably the most challenging to write. So that's why we kind of leave them to the more experienced scientists. They're basically like so I always think of like a history class or something when you have like a first person kind of a narration or topic, which it would be like your own paper, and then you have like a secondary source. So source is the word I meant. And then that is basically a reflection or a summary of all the others combined. There is actually a special issue in the journal Frontiers of Marine Science from early career scientists to early career scientists, and those are review articles about a lot of different topics. I can put that in the chat in a second, and then you guys can check those out. But yeah, they're extremely difficult to write. So yeah. And yeah, I don't know. Do you guys feel like you tend to cite those a lot? Because I personally, I think they're great to read, but I would probably, if only, cite them in the introduction or something. But you would preferably cite like the original paper that you're talking about, not necessarily the review paper. Although they're great to like read into and then kind of start your little journey back and like see, oh, this is what happened or what those authors kind of talked about. And that's how they were summarized in the review I started reading.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Jim, for the answers and the additions from Bridget and Anabel. Going to the next question from Omar. He's asking, what are the main content for the introduction section, that is for either review or research paper?
Like I said, I wait and write the introduction at the end of the writing process, because introductions that I write to start end up not being very good introductions to what we end up with. I think that introductions should begin with a general global scale problem, and then explain for readers in that context of that broad global problem, what particular question or aspect have you addressed in your research, and then why is that question important? Sometimes authors will answer that question at the end of their introduction. They'll tell the answer to the story. You don't have to do that, but that's a writing style. I think that as a general rule, introductions are too long, way too long. And I think this comes partly from kind of early in your career, you're very closely attached to your dissertation. And dissertations, in dissertations, there are no word limits, there are no paragraph limits. You can just go full bore and write as much as you want. For a research article, that's not the case, and especially a letters article where you only have 3,000 words. So I think that you can write an effective introduction in 1 or 1.5 pages of text at the most. And you know, for me as a reader, I don't want to spend a lot of time reading background information. I want to jump into the problem. I want to know what you did, what you learned, and why it's important. And the quicker you can get to that part of your paper, the better the chances are that readers are going to continue to read your paper. But, you know, I see submissions that have 3 or 4 page introductions, and my advice to those authors is in their revision, you can cut this in half without losing anything of importance. Anabel, I see you were nodding your head. What?
Yeah, I was surprised. I don't know. I've always had problems making it longer because I tend to kind of put everything so concise that
See,
I don't think I've ever
I would like
written.
that.
Okay.
I would like your
Never
introduction.
written anything longer than 2 pages,
Yeah.
double spaced. So yeah. Yeah, I think that's especially true. So I work a lot in Arctic sciences, and I mean, I think it's at this stage, unfortunately, you know, we don't have to continuously repeat that the Arctic is undergoing an enormous change and that sea ice is melting. And I think you can summarize that in maybe 1 or 2 sentences. It doesn't have to be a whole paragraph. Yeah. And it's, I think, more important to maybe highlight the methods that you'll go into. So if you're talking about particulate organic matter, kind of what is that and like how does that fall into maybe your discussion? But in general, a lot of people who are going to read your paper are probably going to be your peers who are probably going to be very knowledgeable about the topic that you're already writing about. So
As an editor,
yeah, definitely.
as an editor, I get a lot of comments from your reviewers that say, I need more information about the methods. I've never had a reviewer say, well, the introduction is too short. I need more. Bridget?
I'll take this opportunity to highlight this book that I absolutely love by Joshua Schimmel, Writing Science, How to Write Papers That Get Cited and Proposals That Get Funded. And they go through a couple different structures for whole papers, but they dedicate a chapter to the introduction and talk about the introduction as a funnel, where you're opening broad, you're developing a challenge is what they call it, like what specific challenge or what specific niche and question is your paper addressing. And then, you know, your methods and results are the most narrow, and then your discussion is broadening out again. And they talk about how your introduction should sort of start as broad as your discussion ends broad, that they should match each other. So you don't want to overpromise how much your finding can tell about the broader literature, but you also don't want to undersell it either. And I think that's a really nice kind of mental map for thinking about how broadly you want to start an introduction.
Bridget, there's so many books that have been written on writing, and you like this one in particular. What is it about this? Could you hold it up again? And what is it about this book that?
Well, it's written, so a friend of mine from grad school and I started a writing club together as part of our graduate program. And this book is really written to be, you could use it as a writing club in grad school. So it suggests that you pick some papers that you think are written really well. You pick some papers that you think are hard to read, and you go through them together as a group and kind of discuss. And it was a great experience, both reading the book and talking about it with my grad student peers. And this was a group of people that were relatively diverse. You know, some of us were terrestrial, some of us were freshwater, some of us were marine. But, you know, there's common elements of good writing that anyone can appreciate, regardless of the topic of the individual paper that we were looking at. And I think yeah, this book does a really nice job of pulling those out with examples. They also take examples of their own and talk through them in the various chapters.
So what is it about the papers that are hard to read?
I mean, I think some of the same things that you highlighted, Jim, in your webinar. But I think one of the most common, I saw a question in the chat about this too, is that the old advice was passive voice. And that passive voice really leads to some convoluted sentences that are much longer than they need to be. And the reader isn't kind of following along in a story type structure of someone telling the reader what they did. And I still come across this, that there's a lot of sort of more senior researchers that are advising their students to still write in this passive voice structure, but I think it's really an impediment to us communicating our science in the most easily digestible way.
I think it's a lot of it is about transition. So if you make sure that whatever you talk about in the sentence earlier kind of connects to the following sentence, I think that just, really gives your paper a lot of flow and allows people to kind of maybe not think about it as much, but just read it like you would read a novel or something and just go with the flow rather than being like, wait, they just talked about X, Y, and Z, but they just talked about A, B, and C. Like, how does that kind of match? So that whenever you kind of, I think, stop reading and thinking about it and losing your flow, like that's when you've lost the reader. So just make sure that you keep them feeding bits and pieces of whatever you want to portray in your story, like Jim said.
This is what I was talking about in terms of the logic and in the way in which you present information. It really matters, the sequence of information that you provide for the reader to understand the story and follow the story.
Yeah, I think it's an important component, following the sequence. There's a question from Urias. I think I'll answer this, whether we are going to share the recordings. Yeah, we will share, and Anna will share the link to the YouTube channel. That is the ECOP program YouTube channel, where we will have the recordings of the webinar and the slides as well.
Yeah.
And I would also just want to encourage our participants to write their questions in the Q&A section, because we follow in the chats as well, but then sometimes it may get mixed up with the chats. So moving on to the next question, I think Jim already commented on this, but Jordan is asking, I heard it recommended to use active voice using words such as I and we. Traditionally, was this frowned upon?
Was it found important?
He's asking whether this was traditionally frowned upon.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And in fact, it still is. Depending on what generation the person is, the advice that you're getting. But, I talked in my presentation that, when I started my career as a scientist and writer, we were taught that that the writing in science should be formal, and we've learned that that's not the best way to communicate what we want to communicate in our papers. And active voice, first person, is a writing and speaking style that connects you with your reader as a person. So it's like you're having a conversation. And I think the general consensus now is that it's a more effective way of communication to use first person active voice. And when I get papers that don't use that, I encourage the authors to change their writing style, to modify the way they're presenting their information. I think there are differences. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Anabel.
I just wanted to say it's just the way that each sentence. I think in scientific papers, personally, I would still use we because you're speaking for your co-authors. But if you're writing your bachelor thesis, master thesis, or possibly even your PhD, I think you can refer as I because that is, you are the sole author of that work. But yeah, it's just really a way, I don't have an example at the top of my head now, but just a way that you're structuring the sentence. You would say like, we used X, Y, and Z instead of this analysis was used to whatever, you know.
Awesome, thank you. Moving on, the next two questions that we haven't answered yet are about AI, which is always a very popular category of questions. So I was wondering if Jim can give an overview of how the journals are thinking about using AI in the writing process, and what sort of acknowledgement do you have to give when it comes to using AI in the writing process?
Yeah, this is topic number one these days, partly because things are changing so fast, and I think that we're at a point where the publishing community and the scientific community is trying to understand, where can this go? Where can AI go? What are the benefits and what are the threats of using AI? And collectively, we're trying to identify some guidelines to give to authors. And I suspect that the guidelines that we're giving now are going to change because things are changing so fast. The guidelines that we use for the ASLO journals are primarily the guidelines that come from COPE. It's the Consortium on Publication Ethics. And so we're following the guidelines from COPE, and it has a couple of basic features. One is that you are not allowed to use AI to write a manuscript. And of course, there's no good way for us to verify whether you've met that requirement or not. And so right now, that requirement is based on a lot of trust. We trust authors that when they say that they wrote the paper themselves, the article themselves, we trust that. So, guidance number one is you cannot use AI to write your paper. But rule number two is that if you write an original draft of your manuscript, you can use AI to improve grammar, find structural problems, find spelling problems. And people are doing this. And I personally have no problem with this. I think it's a great idea to give people an opportunity to improve their language, to make their writing more concise using AI, and we allow that. So when a paper is submitted to an ASLO journal, in the submission process, you are asked a question: have you used AI in the production of your paper? And if the answer is yes, we ask the authors to explain what AI tool they used and how they used it, and then that goes in the acknowledgments of their paper. The third rule is that you cannot cite an AI tool as an author for a number of reasons. One is that part of authorship ethics is that all authors have to approve the paper that has been submitted for publication, and an AI tool can't give that verification that they accept the manuscript. So do not list an AI tool as an author, but put that tool listed in the acknowledgments. And then lastly, and maybe from my perspective, the most important guidance that we're getting about AI is in the peer review process. And it is absolutely inappropriate for reviewers to use AI. There are a number of reasons for that. The peer review process is done in confidentiality, and that confidentiality is broken once you put the text that somebody has written in a manuscript in AI space. And so the peer review process cannot use AI. That's where we are now. And there there are just these enormous questions that we have right now of how much can we rely on this trust that authors have not used AI to write their papers. And I think the state of the science right now is that we don't have very good, reliable tools to assess in a submission, a manuscript, whether it was written by a human being or whether it was written by an AI tool. This is one of the many challenges that we face in the writing, publishing, and scientific community. I have had reviews from associate editors and reviewers who've looked at a manuscript, and their comment was, "This paper doesn't look like it was written by a human being because." So as an editor, this is a real challenge because we don't have a definitive way of answering the question of whether the authors actually wrote the paper or not. So there are many, many challenges that we're facing and new challenges that are going to emerge as AI becomes an even more important part of our lives. I do know from my own experience that there are some legitimate uses of AI that can be very helpful in science. I use it to find papers. I think it's a great way to find, especially new papers in a particular area. It's very effective, and I also think it's helpful for finding data sets. So, you know, my science is syntheses from many different data sets, and rather than hunting and pecking, you can ask specifically what kind of data sets you're looking for, what measurements over what period of time, what geographic region, and get reliable answers to those kinds of questions. So we don't know where this is going, and it can go down many different paths, but we do have these few guidelines right now and make them very clear to authors and to reviewers. I'd like to hear Bridget and Anabel's thoughts on this challenge, this big challenge.
I can
Bridget?
go first. I don't know how much I have to add in the sense that I haven't explored a lot of the AI tools. I've spoken with folks who, I mean, in my impression, there's great capacity right now to do things like Jim was saying, check for jargon in your paper, check for grammatical structure, even formatting your references, depending on if you already use a reference manager. But as an editor, I have definitely handled some of these papers like Jim mentioned, where it seemed really clear to me that there was an AI tool that was used to actually generate full sentences of text. And sort of what I noticed is the citations were sort of vaguely within the realm of the literature, but they weren't being cited correctly. And they were, you know, even more off base than if an actual author had gone and read the article or read the title and abstract, but not read the paper. They were even more sort of inappropriately used. And that makes me as an editor and as a scientist really nervous. So it seems like something that we're all going to have to grow with and figure out, yeah, where are these tools really beneficial to science and where are they potentially detrimental? I'm curious what Anabel has to say.
Yeah, I think so there's some areas where I could recommend it. Like if you have writer's block, for example, and you need somebody to help you with format or help you with the structure, you know, that's really great. Or for grammar, we already mentioned that. I really want to warn you guys about using it to generate text because AI tools tend to ramble and tend to just make up things. There are also sometimes hidden invisible characters. So if you were to copy text from an AI tool, that could be seen. Hyphens are used a lot in like ChatGPT. Those aren't necessarily something used in English language, at least definitely not in scientific language. And also, I think a lot of people who might be in this webinar, we are maybe in science because we're maybe more climate conscious, and AI tools do require a lot of energy to power these texts. And there's even, so a lot of these big tech companies, I'm not going to name them, but they're thinking about building their own nuclear power plants in order to power these AI computer generators. So just really be conscious and ask yourselves, can I just do this by using a simple Google search, or does it have to be an AI tool? Is that really required in this situation at this moment?
One other thing, we were talking about threats and benefits, and one benefit that clearly stands out is the benefit of the challenge of the inequities in science based on English language as the required language for many journals. And I see this as a real benefit, that it can help authors whose native language is not English, and English is their second or third or fourth language. And it's perfectly acceptable. If you've written a manuscript, perfectly acceptable to use an AI tool to improve the grammar, the structure, the flow of your manuscript. And I would encourage you to do that, to use these tools.
Good. Yeah, we move on from the AI questions. There is a question from Mamur. He's asking, my question, Dr. Jim, could you please elaborate how a scientific paper can contain a story? As a researcher on very early stage, I'm eager to know about it. So the aspect of developing and bringing the story.
Yeah. Let's see, what can I say about this? You know, I want to make it clear that for me, I don't necessarily start a study or a paper by knowing what the story is. And I think the story kind of evolves as we start looking at the figures, what they represent, the messages that we want to tell. And so the story sometimes takes time to evolve as you're working on a paper. Sometimes I start out thinking I'm going to build a paper around one particular story, and I can't tell that story well. It kind of falls apart, and I move on to another one. But the basic idea is to start with a question or a puzzle or a problem, and then take the reader by the hand and walk through with your own simple language what you did to answer that question, what the answer was, and then explain for readers why that question is important. And I think a good analog is, and I talked about this in the presentation, a good analog is to think about telling a story with the language that you would speak if you're talking to somebody about what you did. And I suppose that it's possible that some papers, some studies, it would be difficult to cast them as a story. There probably are some kinds of papers that just can't be cast this way, and I don't think you should. I don't think you spend a lot of time worrying about this, but I think it's a really effective way for you to. It challenges you to understand what you did and why it's important. It challenges you to explain for general readers why you're excited about your work. I think maybe one simple answer to this is, how can you structure a paper to get readers as excited about your work as you are yourself? And it ain't easy. Bridget?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes when we do science, we're like doing detective work, or we're coming up with really creative ways to ask questions to answer something that hasn't been answered before.
Yeah.
And I think framing your paper in that way and kind of telling the story of how you piece together different lines of evidence to answer a question is pretty neat, especially when you can tie it back to how that information is, you know, of benefit to the scientific community and what kind of implications it might have. There's there's a really nice message box approach that's also in this Josh Schimmel paper, but it's also used, I'm not remembering the name of the group. They do media training for scientists, and they encourage you to kind of think about problem, solution, benefit to society, a so what overall, and just frame, your findings in that context. So I think going through some of those exercises, thinking about how you would communicate your story to your parents or to someone in an elevator can really help with some of that story structure.
Anabel?
Yeah, I think a lot of things I thought about were already said. It just takes time to write a paper. I know there's like these writing courses that even businesses that kind of sell you that you can write a paper in 2 weeks, which I'm sure you can, but stories take or papers take time to develop. I mean, there's some papers that I unfortunately have been, because they keep always getting pushed to the bottom of my to-do list, but I've been writing out like that one paper for 5 years now. And yes, of course, it's also because the story wasn't well developed when I first submitted it, and then it was rejected. These things happen, but some papers are written maybe faster because you're like, okay, this was my hypothesis, here are the results, bam. But a lot of maybe oceanographic studies, it's kind of more like showing or like surveying the environment, and those are really difficult to develop. And yeah, it just takes time, and don't worry if it doesn't happen within a month or two from getting your results and making your figures to having a fully finished publication.
I think the key point here is that there are writing styles that allow you to engage readers and keep readers reading your paper. And there are writing styles that turn readers off and they don't read your paper. So the goal here is to write a paper that really engages the readers.
Yeah, I think in relation to what Anabel just mentioned, there is a question from Emily. So PhD candidate here, currently in the process of writing my first author paper, I'm feeling a lot of pressure from myself to make it perfect. How do you balance the desire to write a great paper with the need to actually finish and submit it? Are there any mindsets or practical strategies that helped you push through that the first stage of major publication?
Anabel, you can take this one.
So congratulations. That's amazing. So you're probably gonna get very harsh comments from your reviewers, so be prepared for that. And they are, however, trying to help you and make it better, because a lot of things that you might be writing, you probably won't see yourself, and maybe you have a supervisor who has like a bajillion tasks and can't also maybe look at your paper as much as maybe other supervisors. That can happen. But yeah, just be prepared for maybe comments. But if it ends up being rejected, that's okay. And even in that case, there's probably comments that will help you improve that version for resubmission. So yeah, it's like just maybe think of like models or something. They go to like 1,000 shows and have to audition, or actors or something, and it's maybe a little bit similar that it's a tough process, and sometimes you get rejected, and other times you have a fully developed paper, and then the peer reviewers will see that and it'll go through. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Bridget, do you want to say something about this challenge, this transition period?
Yeah, I think I'm kind of a perfectionist too sometimes, but the desire to have something be perfect can be really paralyzing, right? And so Jim talked about in the writing retreat context, kind of just having brainstorming, just getting words on the page. I think it's really important to let yourself do that and not hold yourself to a super high standard, but just get ideas on the page, and then you can always restructure and reframe once you have something there to work with. And I also think that some days are easier to write than others. So another book I really like is simply called How to Write a Lot. And the author of this book suggests that you set aside at least 20 minutes, just sit down, try to write each day. And if the words are flowing, you know, give yourself time to continue to write for an hour or for 2 hours. If you're feeling really stuck, you tried and you can move on, and do the other parts of, you know, what you need to do to get your paper, you know, analysis or data work or whatever lab work, whatever else you're working on.
So do you do that, Bridget? Do you write 20 minutes every day?
I have gone through periods where I'm better or worse than that. I definitely think I write at least 20 minutes a day, just providing feedback for co-authors and peer reviewing papers and that sort of thing. But I would like to be better about, for my own paper or papers that I'm working on, designating that time for that. I'm not necessarily super consistent on that right now. But
Anabel,
Yeah, I wrote
go ahead. Go ahead.
I wrote 2 papers last week and I haven't written a single sentence this week. And both of those, so one I submitted and the other one I sent to the co-authors before close to submission. So yeah, it's just, you know, but also, you know, at some point, I think really take it in if you're still a master's student or PhD student, you know, you have a lot of time to focus on your papers. And then once you are a postdoc or at Jim's stage, you know, you have 1,000 other activities you need to do and kind of you really have to make time for writing papers. So really enjoy while you can still go on tangents and like if you're like, oh, I didn't know what this specific topic was, I'm just gonna do a deep dive on that. So enjoy those times while you still have them.
Anabel used the R word, the reject word. And I just want to say something about rejection because it is a fact of life as a scientist. Anabel, have you had a paper rejected?
Yeah, 2. And it was because I was trying to finish them before I was going on to an exposition, and I was like, you know, I'll just finish this and like send it off and see what the reviewers say. So one, the paper didn't, the journal didn't say it was in the scope of the journal, which I disagreed with, but you know, that's the editor's choice. And yeah, the other one that I'm trying to write on this week, is just there's no story there, and I have to really go back to the drawing board and figure out how to put it together and like really show off the data that we have.
And Bridget, have you had papers rejected?
yes. And they've gone on to be great papers in other journals. So I've always gotten good.
So I think that's the key point here. Rejection is just part of being a research scientist. We all have, I've had many papers rejected. And for many of them, and that's true for the journal that I edit, those papers end up being published. All of the weaknesses that were identified in the decision that led to a rejection can often be resolved. And so if you have a paper rejected, go through the process of being shocked and disappointed and angry, but then get over that phase and think, okay, we've got a problem here. We think we can fix it. We're going to submit this paper, a version of this paper to another journal, and it will get published. So don't give up if you have a paper rejected.
And throw a party if you get one accepted.
Awesome. I think that's really great advice to end on. I know we're at time, but maybe I'll just open it up if there's any last thoughts before we close the webinar today from the panelists. There's a lot of people saying thank you in the chat. And then I think we answered this already, but the webinar is recorded and we'll be circulating the link to the recording soon. So
When will that be available, Brittany? Next week or after?
I might have a take on this question. Yeah, it should be in a few days. So I would say today's Tuesday. I would say by next week we will have the recording on our YouTube channel, and I will put the link of our YouTube channel once again in the chat. Then everybody can have a look there. Okay, it should be in the chat again. And of course, we also want to thank our speakers of today, Jim, Anabel, Bridget, and moderators Brittany and Gabriel for this amazing webinar. There were so many attendees, many questions, and I'm happy to see these questions answered very elaborately. So thank you so much for this webinar today.
Yeah. I also say thank you to everyone. I know there are some questions that have not been answered. I'll try to collect them and then I can coordinate with the Bridget, Anabel, and Jim, and then we get responses. Thank you. It was a great turnout. Great. Yeah.
Thank you so much, everybody. Have a good day or evening. Bye.